Welcome to episode 194 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing screenwriters Bobby Rowe and Zach Andrews. They were on episode 43 of the SYS podcast and are now back to talk about the sequel to the original film that they talked about on episode 43, The Houses October Built Part 2. So stay tuned for that interview. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast. And then just look for episode number 194. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline and query letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing screenwriters Bobby Rowe and Zach Andrews. Here is the interview. Welcome, Zach and Bobby, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So you guys were on the podcast almost 2 years ago with The Houses October Built Part 1 film. So I'm going to refer people to that episode to learn more about your backgrounds and kind of how you got that original film off the ground. So that's episode number 43 of the SYS podcast, and I will link to that in the show notes. So now let's dig into The Houses October Built 2. To start out, maybe you can give us a quick pitch or a logline for the film. What is this film all about?
I think it's just this group of friends, getting back on the road to find the most extreme haunted house.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And so how did
it's also, but it's a, go ahead, Ashley.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead. Your explanation, son.
Well, I think it's, but most importantly, it's expanding the world. I think that's the biggest thing you can probably do with the sequel is to you need to grow from it. And there's so much in the haunt community that is out there in the haunt world. And we wanted to show that and continue the story because it was always planned. We were never finished when we were telling the story of Part 1, and so to this was a continuation to expand on Brandy's story and the Blue Skeleton story as well.
Okay, perfect. So how did this idea for a sequel come about? Was it a creative one, as you're just describing it, sort of you felt like there was more story to tell? Was it a business one where the producers and the financiers said, listen, we think we can get this financed because the first one did enough business that it makes a sequel? Maybe just talk about how the sequel kind of came about.
I think it was more when we were creating the story, even back in 2010, we always kind of had the overall story arc to be these two movies together. And we always looked at the first one as just a Part 1, and hopefully if, it did well enough, to speak on your point business-wise, and when it did, then we got to continue, the story we wanted to tell, and we just looked at this as an intermission. So I think that it wasn't so much of like, let's make the first movie and then, now let's come up with a second one. We were just kind of always crossing our fingers in the back and hoping that the numbers would allow us to continue the journey.
Mm-hmm. And so is there potentially enough of a universe for a Part 3? Is that sort of your intention? And what do you have in mind just as far as the full scope of this franchise?
We'll say that, globally, people do haunts a different way. And there's a big world out there. And I think that, our characters can expand on that. We'll just kind of leave it at that.
Okay, perfect. And I wonder are there some other projects, and I'm just trying to kind of get a sense of the scope of sort of the entirety of your career, what else you're working on. Are there some other projects that you guys were pushing forward? And maybe you can just talk about that, sort of the trials and tribulations of pushing some of these other projects forward if you have them, and ultimately why then you came back to this particular story.
Sure, we were brought on about 9 months ago. We were brought on about 9 months ago to rewrite a film and then to direct it actually in February or March of 2018 with some of the producers of Walking Dead. So mixed with, it was kind of a nice release for us to filming, being in post, being sucked into the haunt world, but having this outlet to write a different script, that's much more narrative in fashion and more of a feature. So that's been really fun for us to do. We can't talk too much about it, but that'll be for next year.
Yeah. And I'm curious.
I think it's important.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's important for anybody that's writing or filmmakers to just have a lot of different things at different stages of the funnel, because it all starts with an idea, and then you've got to flesh that idea out, and then write the screenplay, and then try to get financing, and then start production, and then editing, and then hope it does well. There's so many stages, and so with this film, we're kind of at the end, and we've got to have other movies and other ideas kind of at different stages of development, because you just want to stay as busy as you can, and if you kind of rest on your laurels, all of a sudden you can wake up and you've got 3 projects at stage 1, and we all know how hard it is to get from stage 1 to stage 99, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that's something that Bobby and I, especially like now being a little more mature in our filmmaking career, have realized, and so we've got different things at different stages, which is always good.
Yeah, that's sound advice for sure. I'm curious too, just in terms of your careers, do you feel like you've been pigeonholed as horror guys because your first film was a horror film? And have you tried to break out of that, or have you just sort of accepted that and decided to run with that and just basically build on that niche?
Well, I think everybody that, no matter what you are, it's comedy, action, horror, in the beginning, you're going to be held towards that genre, and because it's easier to sell, it's easier to trust somebody, and so we understand that. I mean, if that's probably any occupation in life. Mm-hmm. Of course, we want to be as well-rounded as we can. We love the horror world, and we want to continue to be in that as long as we can. But sure, there's other stories we want to tell in different genres, and that's going to be a battle. And we're going to always try to, we have those ideas, we have those scripts. And, when the time is right for that, but, until that happens, we love it over in the horror world. Mm-hmm. It's fun. And the one thing that people probably forget about or some take for granted is horror allows for such amazing ideas, just stories in general that you don't need A-list actors, of notoriety. And it's one of the few genres that allows for that. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would, any aspiring horror writers out there, anything can happen with that, because you don't actually need Tom Cruise to get it greenlit. You just need a great idea.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about your writing process a little bit. First, let's just start out with collaborating. How do you guys collaborate? Are you in the same room writing? Do you outline and then divide up scenes? Maybe just take us through your writing process and even some of the specific tools that you guys use for collaboration.
Yeah, I think that we used to live together, and so I think that allowed more of the collaboration in the same room. Mm-hmm. But now Bobby's married with 2 little kids. That's not a writing room I'm going to be in. So he can speak to the challenges of that. But I think that we've just always, we've been friends for so long and writing partners for so long that we really just trust each other we go back and forth with kind of color-coded drafts. And so it's like, okay, now it's your turn to look over these 20 pages and kind of make your notes and edits, and then we hop on the phone and just discuss them. And I know Bobby would feel the same way, that we will set aside 2 or 3 hours thinking that we're going to be able to get done, and we get through 20 pages of a 95-page script in that amount of time. And so it always takes a lot longer. Mm-hmm. Some things you move quickly on, and then it could just be one specific line or scene that ends up being a 30-minute discussion, because if when you're passionate about it, you want to like take all angles and really make sure that if you're going to cut that from the script, like once you cut it, it kind of goes away. And so we just you try to make sure that you're making good choices, and then if something really, if we're both really banging our heads against a wall, we'll kind of put it out there to a couple people and get their opinion as well.
Yeah, yeah. So, Bobby, maybe you can speak to the difficulties or the challenges, I should say, of being a screenwriter and having small children. Do you write in your house? Do you have an office? You go outside of the house to kind of get away from things? Maybe you just describe your writing setup.
So yeah, you try to. I mean, sometimes I have an office in the house, and you try to use it, but then in some ways, I mean, speaking to all the dads out there, if you are within a certain range of your children, you know, they want to come see you or talk to you, and I'm a very much like in the zone person, and you don't ever want to be a bad dad. You don't ever want to not be able to go out there, see them, give them a hug, and so, you know, there comes to a point where some of it, you know, you have to take anyone else's job, and you need to find an office, do an office outside the house for at least, you know, a certain amount of time with it. I mean, what's nice about being a writer is you have a little bit of liberties in your schedule and time. So hopefully I'm able to spend more time with my children than I would if I was commuting or you know, doing a job that's further away from home. So that's been nice, but you do have to be very disciplined, and you have to know when you have to have your kids and family around is very, very tough. But I'm glad that I can be near them. But there are certain times where you need that silence.
Yeah, for sure. So how much time do you guys spend outlining versus actually opening up Final Draft and writing script pages?
Oh yeah, index cards are a big part of us before we even get into anything. I mean, we want to make sure that's as fine-tuned as we can, because there's no reason to kind of go off on some tangent that's ultimately never going to matter. So we try to get that down beat for beat as much as we can, and it's actually really good at that on just dissecting the formulas and our page count and looking where we need to be. And so that's been our process.
And just in terms
it sounds cliche, but it's
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think all the you know, it sounds cliche, but it's like the, you know, the colored index cards and things like that. I mean, it really does help. And, you know, there's a reason that, you know, some of these, you know, screenwriting books or suggestions or whatever, you know, that they're helpful because people have gone on this path before you. And so I think, you know, you kind of find your own methods, but I think it's important to listen to people that have been successful in this business and try to emulate some of the things that they're doing, because they're actually saving you a lot of headaches because they've already fought the battle.
Yeah. So just in terms of like actual time, how much did you guys spend on this script in terms of the outlining stage? Are we talking like you outlined for a month and then wrote for a month? Maybe just give us some, even just ballpark figures in terms of time.
Well, the hard part about this script is we had to write in generic haunts. Because we weren't sure where we were going to shoot. We knew everything, all the exposition. We knew exactly what needed to each, you know, form of haunt. But when you didn't have the actual geographical location mixed with the theme of the haunt, little parts of the story changed. And we also didn't know where we would have clearance. We really wanted to shoot at the Zombie 5K in Minneapolis with 30,000 zombies, but we didn't know if we'd get approved for that. Luckily, we did. And the same with the Zombie 5K. We just wanted to show some different experiences within the confines of Halloween haunting and how big that is. And so we wrote from, you know, call it Haunt A, call something else Haunt D, and we wrote the narrative within that. And the second we got approval, then there was not an overhaul of the script, but call it a 20% change because of themes and then we have an idea of the scene. Let's change our scene this way. So you just have to kind of call some audibles when you're shooting on live sets with a movie like this.
Yeah. So what does your development process look like? So you've spent a while, you've developed the script, you've written it up, and then how does that development process look? Do you send it out to the actors? In this case, you're in a kind of a unique position. You're using many of the same actors from the first movie. Do you send it to them to get feedback?
Right.
Do you send it to the producers, financiers? What does your development process look like? Who do you get notes from?
Yeah, we get some from, with Michael, who's one of the actors in the movie that plays my brother and is my brother. We've always gone back and forth, with him. He's able to separate himself and look at it in a constructive way. And then there's certain parts with Brandy, including the finale in the end, we didn't want her to see everything around the corner. Because I just think it's helpful on trying to get away from, the standard, horror tropes that come with found footage. We want things to feel as organic as possible. And sometimes, you can't fake a scare. There's always, one of the hardest things for actors to do is play drunk, right? Like little things like that. We want to make sure that we have the believability factor going on. So I think everybody kind of has a different role in that on how we get this movie completely made.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's people that we have probably about 10 people in a trust circle that we have that we go back and forth with that don't include the actors. That can kind of go from there.
Yeah. And was there any?
Yeah, and I think
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think it's more of, to answer your question about showing somebody the full script is. I think we kind of did it more in scenes with people, just to. I mean, we sometimes would give Brandy a scene, the night before, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, we're going to go do this." And we're like, "Yep," because we just didn't want her to, have too much of a expectations of what she's doing. And then other times, there'll be something we need to kind of get to, and it'll just be in the moment. And that's why Brandy is so key to this film, is she really is a team player and a trooper, and she just trusts us to know that we know what we're doing, and she just kind of sometimes has to blindly just go into the dark with us, per se.
Yeah.
But I hope that helps the authenticity and kind of the organicness of having a cool moment that we can capture on film that you just couldn't even write it.
Yeah. So talk to me just quickly about the approval. You just said, getting approval. Talk about just sort of the steps of this. Did the financiers of this film, did they finance you and basically greenlight you before the script? Or was it more like, okay, you guys write a script and then we'll talk? How did that process actually go?
It's a little more of the when you have a part one, when you're able to be fortunate enough to have a successful movie that it's going to follow along the same lines and story. Trust is so much different than when we walked into part one, mm-hmm. when nobody knew exactly what we were going to execute. They didn't have that trust factor going on. So for part two, we were able to kind of be a little bit more close to the chest about certain things because financiers trusted us from part one, and that made the process a little bit easier. And you're allowed to take a little more chances that mm-hmm. sometimes on paper people may scratch their head at or not understand.
Yeah. So how can people see?
And I think it says a lot, for Mark. So Mark Ward is the head of A, and he, like Bobby was saying, I think, when the numbers came in to support a sequel, it was great that he, just said, you guys, I trust you guys, figure it out. He was such a big champion of us, being first-time filmmakers, and just being able to say, I believe you guys, and I think you guys will come up with something great, and just said, go do it. I think that's a rare thing to be able to have that, and so we're appreciative of him. Look forward to doing more stuff with him in the future.
Yeah, for sure. So how can people see The House is October Built 2? Do you know what the release schedule is going to be like?
So it's in theaters and VOD day-and-day release. And they'll be playing in the major cities. It'll be Chicago, Dallas, Miami, New York, Houston, Seattle, Cleveland. I'm probably missing one or two in there. But most of the major cities, it'll be playing in there. But if you're not within those cities, it'll be on VOD, and you can always catch part one. Is still currently on Netflix.
Okay, perfect. And what's the best?
And I advise anybody that's listening to rewatch part one. I think is very helpful, especially because the two movies button up. So If you're listening to this and you haven't seen it in a while or never seen it, definitely see part one again.
Okay, perfect. So how can people, what's the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing? If you have a blog, website, Facebook, Twitter, anything you're comfortable sharing, I will round up, I'll put in the show notes, but you can just give us that information now.
Sure. The Facebook site for the movie it basically follows a lot of what we're doing, and then the Instagram is House is October Built, which is more of a portfolio. There's a lot of headshots of scare actors and cool behind the scenes pictures, stuff like that we're really proud of, that we've kept up with for almost 4 or 5 years. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there. And then Zach and I are both on Twitter. I'm Bobby Rowe 1, and Zach, you're Zach Andrews what?
13.
Perfect.
Zach Andrews 13.
Perfect. I will round all that up and put it in the show notes. Bobby and Zach, another great interview. I really appreciate it. Congratulations on getting another film finished, and I look forward to your next film.
Sounds good.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Great
you.
talking to you.
Talk to you guys later. Just want to mention 2 things I'm doing at Selling Your Screenplay to help screenwriters find producers who are looking for material. First, I've created a monthly newsletter that will be sent directly to producers. Every member of SYS Select can submit 1 logline per newsletter. I went and emailed my large database of producers and asked them if they would like to receive this monthly newsletter of pitches. So far, I have around 400 producers who have signed up to receive it. These are producers hungry for material and happy to read scripts from new writers. So if you want to participate in this pitch newsletter and get your script into the hands of lots of producers, sign up at sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. And secondly, I partnered with one of the premier paid screenwriting leads sites so I can syndicate their leads to SYS Select members. There are lots of great paid leads coming in each week from our partner. Recently, I've been getting 5 to 10 high-quality paid leads per week. These are producers and production companies who are actively looking to buy material or who are looking to hire a screenwriter for a specific project. If you sign up for SYS Select, you'll get these leads emailed directly to you several times per week. These leads run the gamut from production companies looking for a specific type of spec script to producers looking to hire a screenwriter to write up one of their ideas or properties. Producers are looking for shorts, features, TV, and web series pilots. It's a huge array of different types of projects that these producers are looking for, and these leads are exclusive to our partner and SYS Select members. To sign up, go to sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Spanish screenwriter and director Mateo Gil. He wrote the original Open Your Eyes screenplay, which starred Penelope Cruz and went on to be made into the film called Vanilla Sky in this country. So we talk about his latest sci-fi film called Re-Alive, which he wrote and directed. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. To wrap things up, I just want to touch on a few things from today's interview with Bobby and Zach. One of the things that stood out to me as they were talking was the part that they mentioned about having a lot of different projects in various stages of development. This is so important. I've recently been emailing back and forth with a screenwriter who is just stuck in, I would say, sort of development hell with her project. She's been rewriting it. She's submitted to a number of different analyst services, contests, and she's just wondering, why hasn't it gone further in the contest? I'm trying to rewrite it. And I just get the sense that she's being a little bit too much of a perfectionist on this one script. And it's a balancing act, but I feel like what Bobby and Zach are kind of getting at is you need scripts in different stages of development, and the reason for this is because you're not going to ever know which ones are going to actually take off and which ones are going to actually go. And so if you've got one project going, it may or may not go. And back to this woman I was talking about, she's just constantly rewriting this one project, submitting it to contests. She was emailing me to see if maybe my SYS script analysis service might be of use to her. And my advice really in those situations is to just finish the script and move on to another script. That's just so important because then you've got 2 scripts out there ready to go. And again, it's a balancing act. You don't want to be just writing dreck and pushing that out. It's got to be polished and up to professional standards. But by the same token, you don't want to spend 5 years working on the same script. You've got to be pushing new material out there, getting different projects going. And I try and hold myself up as an example for this. Obviously, I have my feature film, The Pinch, which I'm wrapping post-production on as we speak. I also have a number of other other writing assignments. I've mentioned this on the podcast. I've had these 2 TV pilots that I've been working with a producer. So those are in the very, very early stages of sort of development. The pinch is sort of at the end of the development process. I also have a number of scripts optioned, which are at various stages. Some of them have been rewritten a lot, and the producers are now just trying to raise the money. Some of them probably need a little bit of polish. Some of them, the directors or the producers are trying to attach talent. So I've got a number of projects in different stages of development. And again, I just think that's so important. I'm going to be lucky if any of these scripts go. I've also got some that are pretty early in stages. I talked about this in the podcast. I've got my thriller, female-driven thriller that I wrote last spring. I also polished up my rom-com last winter. And again, these are just scripts that I've got out there, and I'm trying to get going. I have a little bit of interest on both of those. There's no formal option agreement, but I found a little bit of interest on those. So again, those are really early stage of sort of what you can expect with a script. Just finding a little bit of interest. Maybe there'll be an option agreement on those. Maybe there won't. But again, I have more projects that I can push out. And a good example, the rom-com I just mentioned that I rewrote last winter. It was an old script that I wrote many years ago, and it just needed an update. So I went and I spent quite a bit of time rewriting it, sent it out to some of my contacts, and just sort of coincidentally, a month or so after I'd finished up the polish, or maybe 2 months after I finished up the polish, I got an email from a director who I've worked with before, and he said he had a friend who was interested in financing a film that had to take place in a restaurant that he was looking to promote. So again, I had this script. Coincidentally, that script that I just polished up, this rom-com, it takes place, 60-70% of it takes place in a restaurant bar. So that was the perfect script for his needs. And again, if I didn't have a script that he specifically was looking for, in this case, something that takes place primarily in a restaurant, I wouldn't have been able to work on this with him. And if you've got, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe even 10 or 12 polished scripts, it's just going to give you a much greater chance of finding a match with whatever a producer is looking for. If you've got, 15 polished scripts and a producer comes to you and says, I need this, that, and the other thing, there's a good chance of those 15 scripts you've got polished up and ready to go that you're going to have something that's going to fit. If you only have one script that's super polished and super developed, that's great. However, you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities. And this just, it trickles down. I get the leads from Inktip every week. I send out leads myself through SYS Select, through that service. And again, in those cases, the producers are looking for stuff very, very specific. And if you only have one script, it's going to be very, very tough for you to constantly be submitting to those types of submissions, because you just won't have a kind of script that they're looking for, whether it be different genres, female-driven, action scripts, horror scripts, scripts that take place in this location. I see those all the time on Inktip and through my own SYS Select leads when we send them out. There'll be a producer who has access to a very specific location. I think I saw one a couple of weeks ago that was a school, that they wanted something that took place primarily at a school. I've seen them where, it takes place primarily at a, rural farmhouse. And clearly those producers have access to those locations. And so they're trying to find a good script that they can shoot and take advantage of these locations that they have. So again, it's a fine line and it's a balancing act. You don't want to just push out stuff that's not developed and is not polished, but by the same token, you don't want to spend too long just constantly rewriting and trying to polish a script. It's better at some point to just move on and have more scripts than it is to have, one very, very, very polished script. It's probably better to have 5 scripts that maybe aren't quite as polished, but obviously they still have to be up to industry standards. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.